All right, how's it going, everybody? I know it's been a minute. I've been MIA, but I know the direction I want to take this thing now. Starting with this video being the beginning of a focus on world building in general, going back to the roots of this channel. So this one is for my writers, my dungeon masters, my game masters, and the like. Let's talk world building. So you want to start a new story, and maybe you want to homebrew and bring some original flavor and concepts to the table. But where do you even begin? This one kind of stuns me for a while. I'm like, all right, I don't know what I want to put in. I don't know what I want to do to intrigue my characters. Well, let's start off with giving some background before I share my experience with the matter, all right? Back in high school, I came up with this role-playing game. I dubbed it Scenario. I hadn't played any of the other stuff, D&D, wasn't exposed to stuff like that. Essentially, though, Scenario was and always is a homebrew without any systematic rules that incorporated dice and all the checks and balances, if you will. Just me as a narrator telling a mass story that started with 4 people and quickly spanned to almost 10 people. Actually, I think it was like 12 or 13. This was big for me because I wasn't a social person, but this newfound passion became extremely fun. The difference between my Scenario and other TTRPGs like D&D is that I also split the parties all the time. I managed all of my players' stories and allowed them to party up when it felt appropriate in the story, or they just wanted to help each other out. And most importantly, for this video, is my campaigns weren't limited to a set guide with lore or one big IP. It was whatever I wanted it to be. So I said the homebrew part. Sometimes it was a mythology scenario based on gods and characters from all mythos. Other times it was my favorite anime and maybe my take on fan fiction like Marvel. I tell the setting and play the scenarios to them and let them play out their reactions and responses as well as craft their origins most of the time. At some point, they began to truly tell the stories themselves. I was again doing the setting, but they was bringing it to life. Crazy thing is, my first scenario, the one that spanned to 10 plus people, was 100% crafted from scratch. Now, the base idea of placing yourself in the shoes of a made-up character started with me and my cousin. As we grew up, we would play out scenarios like Ben 10 versus Naruto. We had to answer the questions others wouldn't. But at this point, I just randomly started to tell a story that was spinning in a real time. Spinning in real time in my head, I just began to tell the story to go with this whole debate on who would win. So where do we start when it comes to, how to get started? Well, where did I start? I start by taking Earth as my setting. Boom. Now you have your planet, right? But it needed to be familiar enough that my players could jump right in without too much prep. While still being something new and different, right? So I kept most of the timeline of Earth the same, except for one major theme. Humans could have powers. Now that seemed exciting, but I wanted action and conflict for my players, and I wanted it off rip. So I began to think of the opposition to those with powers. Eventually, I landed myself at the so original bad scientists who want to experiment on mutants trope, But I made it my own. There's nothing wrong with borrowing to build your RPG story. There's no copyright here, unless you're trying to publish. But even then, unless your idea is one-to-one, you should be fine. Borrow a concept, but then flip certain aspects on its head. And before you know it, you have your own thing. So next, like I said, I wanted them to start with conflict. So I started everyone's characters in a lab. Just captured experiments in a lab. Randomly, they become aware as there is a breakout in the system shuts down. That leads to everyone's escape. I essentially mixed Maximum Ride, if you read that, with the beginning to Skyrim. After you escape jail, the world is your oyster kind of deal, But what's interesting is next, I brought the government organization of scientists to a different light too. I worked in some bad eggs that would be allies to our heroes. Unexpectedly, I got a story that I was sure would span off into a superhero, supervillain cliche story, but instead it became a high-stakes spy espionage mutant thriller with a lot of world at war vibes. So be sure to take the typical black and white organizations and characters and add some spice and a new flavor with it. Take a few more minutes of thought before we just, breeze over it. So I've already started with my own planet, but it's Earth. But I changed a few things up, gave people power, started off the op. I chose the period. So I first chose my planet. Then I chose my time period. Then I chose the history for this one. It was super easy because I didn't have to create new history. Next, I chose a beginning for my heroes and crafted their immediate antagonists. Like I said, I created the scientists right after, right? Then all was left was to fill in the in-betweens. Jumping from the world I want down to the antagonists and protagonists allows me to create inner bounds for myself so that I can take off from there with the storytelling. And like I said, once you have the rails and borders to your sandbox, your players will help you craft the world with their backgrounds and actions and choices moving forward. So at that point, you've made it much easier than sitting there with the pen and paper thinking, where do I go from here? Next, we will go over created new history for a brand new world or timeline, which is a lot more difficult. Anyway, thanks for checking me out again, and let's build worlds together.